Liberal leader hopeful Mark Carney made an announcement today in Halifax, and despite not being the leader of the Liberal Party, it absolutely played like a man who was running against Pierre Poilievre for Prime Minister. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name's Sterling. I'm your host. Well, Mark Carney finally has come out to the public, and he has his new environment plan, which is exactly the same as the old environment plan, just covered in more BS. He was surrounded by all of the Nova Scotia MPs, including Sean Fraser and the guy that had put his name forward to be leader of the party and then changed his mind. Now, I don't know why Sean Fraser was there, because I thought he was retiring. Perhaps he's changed his mind on that as well. I can say for the most part that this conference, this announcement, this speech was more about trying to convince everybody that he's going to be the next savior of Canada. And he focused primarily on telling the world that, or telling Canada that he was no longer going to be having the carbon tax. He was going to remove it completely. However, that's not really true. He's simply going to do more of the same that he's always been doing. And let's be straightforward. The environmental plans are failing all over the world. And I will get into that either in this video or in the next one. However, this guy is just as bad as Stephen Guilbeault. He's a zealot. The only difference, of course, is that Stephen Guilbeault is doing it because he's a zealot, and Mark Carney's doing it because he sees a pathway to earning himself power and money. Now, I will break this down for you kind of slowly because it was a lot of BS, like a lot of BS. And I don't want you to miss any little bit of it, because this guy is a danger to the country, and I can tell that just in the short time that I've heard him speak.
President Trump thinks Canada will cave in. We will never, ever bow down to a bully. Canadians will always stick together. And we won't stand by as tariffs hurt our workers and their families. Canadians need to remain united.
Now, I'm sure that I'll be able to show you how, when he says united, what he means is everybody that agrees with him or that he does it his way. Anybody else, he doesn't want to be united with. So that's the entire conservative wing of the country and most of the center. However, we'll get into that. I'll speak more to this idea that he's somehow calling Trump a bully and that he will never do what Trump wants. So if I read you correctly, Mr. Carney, you're not going to stop the flow of illegal drugs and illegal immigrants going into the United States of America. And when Trump says he's had enough of that and he's going to initiate tariffs, you're calling him a bully for doing that. Now, it's important to remember that, right? That he says that if he initiates a tariff, he's a bully. That's going to come back to bite Mr. Carney here in a minute or three. On top of it being ridiculous. What are you talking about? You will never back down. What are you talking about? It's an absolutely reasonable request, and the idea that you think that it isn't is a little bit of a reflection of you, not of Trump.
Well, President Trump and some Americans may be turning back the clock on climate action. As Sean Fraser just indicated, we're picking up the pace. We're here today to address, in effect, three major issues that are wrapped into one big one. First, how to help hardworking families to finally get ahead. Secondly, how to boost the competitiveness of Canadian companies. And thirdly, how to build the strongest economy in the G7. All of these issues, each of these issues, is affected by how we as Canadians play our part in addressing climate change.
So right away, let's just look at the elephant in the room. The corporate media and the Liberal Party have been trying to convince you that the next election shouldn't be about the carbon tax. And his opening statements is all about climate change and the carbon tax. So it seems that they don't want you thinking about the carbon tax, but at the same time, they want to be doing nothing but talking about it. It's kind of weird. Of course, we shouldn't expect any less from the corporate media and the far left Liberal NDP party. However, I would say this to you, Mr. Carney, those three things that you just said could all be improved greatly with no carbon tax. How can we improve the lives of Canadians? Destroy the carbon tax. How can we improve the prospects of businesses? Destroy the carbon tax. How can we play our part in the global green economy? Well, we can wait for the rest of the world to catch up to us, or we can get on board with our strongest ally, the United States, and not worried too much about it. One thing I know for sure we shouldn't do is tell the leader of our only market that we will not be pushed around. We will not do what he wants, and that if he asks us to do anything, he's a great big bully. Appreciate that if Mark Carney were to be, if Mark Carney wins the leadership of the Liberal Party, he will be Prime Minister, which means that even if it's for a short span, he just called the leader of the United States a bully, and he thinks that that guy's going to now talk and play nice with him. You want to talk about a lack of vision, diplomacy, or comprehension. Well, I think that one little statement right there just summed it all up. This is exactly the same. This is like Justin Trudeau and Stephen Guilbeault merged together as one.
And today is about change, but it's not about cosmetic change. It's about the right change that puts money in people's pockets. It's about change that makes our companies more competitive. It's about change that builds the strongest economy in the G7. Now, when Pierre Poilievre says we have to choose between fighting climate change and growing our economy, he's lying to us.
Well, I guess it's not about change. It's about being exactly the same. Money in your pocket and the G7, the G7, the G7. I guess a globalist always looks at it in the G7. However, there's a serious problem with your contention that you're going to have the strongest economy in the G7, because everybody knows, and if you don't, the United States is also part of the G7. And there is no way in the world that we are catching up to that economy with these current liberal policies. If they were working, they would have already worked. They don't work. They might work for a couple of elitists, a couple of the really wealthy, but for the most part, for the average Canadian, they do not work. And I especially love how, on the one hand, we're supposed to be all working together, but on the other hand, Pierre Poilievre's message is not what you want to hear. And I, in my life, have never heard Pierre Poilievre say that climate change and the economy have to be separate. Never once. What he says is the carbon tax is not the way to go. That's what he says. So there's only one person in that statement who's doing a little bit of lying, Mr. Carney, and it's not Pierre Poilievre.
Had more than enough of such division and confusion. With Canada now under attack, it is time to come together. And since Canada's current climate policy has become too divisive, it's time for a new, more effective climate plan that everyone can get behind. It's a plan that makes our economy more competitive, it grows good jobs today, and it will grow better ones in the future.
Well, first of all, let's talk about how the highly paid economist in the country, the PBO, says to you that the carbon tax is not putting money in anybody's pocket, but the Liberal Party refuses to acknowledge it or refuses to admit it. And so that's going to be causing a little bit of confusion for sure. In addition, you say that the environment plan is causing division. It's not, though. It's actually united the country. We all agree that it is wrong, that it does not work. And it is costing us and destroying our economy. Not only do we in Canada agree, but most of the world agrees. The only people who don't agree are you and a few select liberal elites who clearly only are out for their own best interests and not for the best interests of the country. And we've heard it all before. It's all going to do everything in the future, in the future, in the future. You got to suffer now so that later on nobody suffers. We've already been going through a lot for like 7 years. So, I mean, the future should be here by now. No? Just more of the same. That's all this is. It's just trying to rebrand or repackage the same old thing.
Instead, what we'll do is create a system of incentives to reward Canadians for making greener choices. So it means that you'll no longer have to pay more to fuel your car or heat your home. But when you choose an energy-efficient appliance or an electric car or home insulation, you will be rewarded, and we will get the big polluters to pay for it.
These guys, man, I'm telling you right now, it's an incentive now, right? So you're not going to pay more for gas, but you're going to buy an electric car that we know the country can't handle between the grid and the cold. The electric cars are not going to work in Canada. He's going to incentivize everybody to buy a new appliance, or you're going to get insulation in your home, despite the fact that he wants to put everybody into high density. I mean, I'm sure in his vision of high density, we'll all be sharing a stove. The real part of that sentence that we need to hear is when he says we're going to get the big polluters to pay for it. You won't be paying as much for gas. So he just wants to take the carbon tax and put it on the other end. He wants to put it on the company so the company's paying for it at source. You'll notice that he didn't say cheaper food because he's not going to take the carbon tax off the farmers or the ranchers or the people in greenhouses that are growing tomatoes. He's going to, in fact, give them more. So the part that they told themselves originally when they put the carbon tax together, they were going to share it, right? Some were going to go on to companies and some were going to go on to people, but they're going to just take that off the people, put it on the companies so that the companies can then charge it on the rear end to the people. There's nothing new in this. This is exactly the same, and I'm sure it will be quite bad. It'll be worse.
If we were only to remove the carbon tax, we'd create two problems. First, Canada's emissions would not decrease as rapidly as before. And secondly, most Canadian households would be worse off because of the end of the rebate. Pierre Poilievre's, with his simplistic and misleading axe the tax, doesn't care about either problem. That's possible because he doesn't really believe in climate change. Or it's possible he thinks that Canada, for the first time in our history, should be a free rider on a massive global problem, leaving for other countries to solve. It's certainly clear that he doesn't really understand how important that money in the rebate is to hardworking families across the country. And that's why our plan will directly solve both problems by both implementing new climate policies that are at least as effective in lowering emissions and by bringing forward new economic measures that will make Canadian families better off.
Well, there's a lot wrong with what you had to say there. I think I'll start with the idea that the carbon tax is putting money in people's pockets. We all know that it isn't. Everybody knows that it isn't. And you can tell that everybody knows that it isn't because when Pierre Poilievre says axe the tax, nobody is saying, yeah, that's a terrible idea. They're all saying, no, let's do that because this tax is destroying my economic prospects. It is draining my bank account and is basically leaving me in debt. We see the credit card debt shoot through the roof. We see that everything has gone up. We're not stupid. That's the issue that you don't seem to want to grasp. It's not about whether or not he says a slogan. It's about what we believe. And Mr. Carney is completely out of touch, and now he wants to try and tell you that we're going to lead the way in the carbon. Canada. You want me to believe what? That the policies that you've implemented for the last 7 years are somehow going to work this time? They're not working. They do not work. They make maybe 25 people in the whole world very, very rich, and the rest of us are starving.
First, as I mentioned, to help Canadians invest in greener policies, we'll have the big polluters pay for climate incentives by developing and integrating a new consumer carbon credit market into the industrial pricing system. That way we ensure that taxpayers aren't on the hook for consumer climate incentives, while we still provide price certainty for households when they make climate smart choices.
So what he just said there is, we're going to make companies that are in Canada pay more carbon tax. And he hopes that you don't realize that that means that the product they are manufacturing is going to cost more. It's such an insult to our intelligence, that entire statement.
The second thing we'll do is, with a new Made in Canada competitiveness strategy, my government will improve and tighten the output-based pricing system for large companies. We'll extend it to 2035, and we will speed up approvals of clean energy projects.
Now, that's a little more insidious. What he just said there is that small companies will not get an opportunity to manufacture or make anything. They will all have to be large companies that he personally puts his stamp on. His personal approval will be required to make anything, to have any innovation, to produce anything in the country of Canada.
Third thing we're going to do is to ensure that there's fair competition for our companies and that we penalize high polluting foreign imports. So we're going to develop a carbon border adjustment mechanism. What that does is promote jobs here at home, it prevents carbon leakage abroad, and it aligns Canada with our allies who are still engaged in the fight against climate change.
You can't make it up. I mean, the man is literally serious. The carbon border adjustment mechanism, which will add costs to products so that Canadian businesses can do better. I feel like I've heard of that somewhere. What he just described as a tariff for products coming into the country that might harm Canadian businesses, or at least to be competitive with Canadian businesses. And then he will do it for the high polluters unless they are in alignment with our political goals, which is exactly what Donald Trump is doing. I mean, it's exactly the same thing. There's no difference in it at all. So that either makes Mark Carney delusional, a bully, or a hypocrite. I mean, he's delusional if for some reason in his mind what he's saying is different than what Donald Trump is doing. Or if he's aware that it's the same thing, then he must, because he called Donald Trump a bully, he must also be a bully for all of those high polluters. Or if he thinks it's okay for him and not for Donald Trump, then he's a hypocrite. He also will not keep this because he has billions of dollars invested in foreign oil. Most of the gas in the pumps in Canada does not come from Canada. It comes from other countries that are high polluters. And he has billions of dollars invested in that. So then we can add to the list that he's being dishonest. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, let's just take it at face value. A carbon border adjustment is a tariff on products coming into the countries that might harm local businesses, which is identical to what Trump is saying. So it turns out that Mark Carney admires Donald Trump, that he wants to copy Donald Trump. Maybe he's even a little bit jealous of Donald Trump.
Fourth thing we will do is to build Canada's competitiveness. And we'll do so by boosting investments where they're needed the most. My government will provide greater investment tax credits, more Canada Growth Fund initiatives, and major provisions for accelerated depreciation of private investments. And these will all reinforce the incentives created by those changes to the output-based pricing system.
Greater investment tax credits. So large corporations that are building something, he will give them tax dollars off, just like the battery plants that are now defunct. The billions of dollars we threw into those, exactly the same thing. Then he says he's going to do Canada Growth Fund initiatives, which you and I will know as the Green Slush Fund, for all of those businesses out there that are trying to go green but simply don't have the money. He's going to give them tax dollars to do that. So it turns out that it's not going to save the taxpayer any money. It's the last statement that he says in there, though, that's really kind of greasy, and I wrote it down. Major provisions for accelerated appreciation of private investments, meaning he will give tax dollars to corporations that might lose money because the investments that they had are not being looked after by the government. Things that they put money into have been turned down by the green initiatives of his government. He's simply going to take tax dollars and give it corporate welfare. Major provisions for accelerated depreciation of private investment. And I mean, that's how the guy makes his money. Private investment, that's what he does. That's his thing. Maybe we should use his company's capital to pay for it. Why should we be using tax dollars? All of that money will be deterred and driven away from hospitals and schools and roads. That will be taken away from education. That will be taken away from opening up the country. Everybody will be living in these tiny little houses, and he'll be telling you all that, don't worry about it. I'm getting fat rich off your tax dollars because am building a green slush fund factory up north.
To finance these good Canadian jobs and great economic growth, our government will move quickly to finalize and implement the Made in Canada Sustainable Investment Guidelines. We'll implement a taxonomy for every priority sector and mandate broad coverage of climate risk disclosure.
Now, the first couple of things he said in there were just ways that he can tax us. That's just him demanding that we give more money. And, in the whole socialist regime where the companies and the government have to work together. And like he's been doing all day, it's the third one you have to hear, broad coverage of climate-based disclosure. He wants every company in the country to talk about where they make the product, how they make it, and how it might impact the economy, the environment. He wants to be able to approve whether or not your company does something on the environment that he doesn't agree with. His own company's no problem at all, but your company, he has to approve it, which means you can't even start a company, right? Because everybody that wants to get started on a company will be faced with an enormous amount of regulation. It'll be cost and documentation and regulation. All the while, he'll be doing whatever he wants to do. He'll be bringing in products that we can't make in Canada, but he can make overseas, and bringing them in and saying, obviously it's okay. It doesn't need a tariff on it because we can't make it here in Canada. So that's not competing with local business. What he's describing is far worse than any of the carbon plans that we have put together so far. This is, wow. It's shocking to think that he somehow wants to have every business in the country get his approval. And you sure is darn tootin' that he'd be saying, well, just put me on the board so that he can somehow get money out of it. This is a power-hungry person who cannot be trusted to do the right thing for the common human being. And the one thing that Donald Trump is doing is going to make the middle class explode. Now, why don't the middle class want jobs? The next step will be, we're all going to be living in little cubicles, right? Because he loves the high density. In his brain, it's the high density for me and you, and it's private jets for him.
Eventually, the fever that has gripped our neighbor to the south, eventually that will pass. I'm announcing today we'll reduce emissions faster than before. They'll help create Canadian jobs. They'll build the competitiveness of our major companies and begin to realize Canada's immense potential to be a global leader in a clean economy.
It's a real zealot looking at it right there, but for all the wrong reasons. He's just doing it for his own personal gain. It doesn't bother him whether or not the rest of us suffer for it. I'm sure that he thinks that the fever pitch will die down in the United States. It'll just be getting ramped up when they'll be running for a politician again. And I promise you that when the next American presidency runs, the economy will be in such a way that it won't matter which side of the aisle you're on. You will be talking about making it America first. You will be saying all the same things that Trump is saying. It's going to take 30 years for anybody to want something different. Because what this guy seems to think is that we're all willing to make sacrifices that he himself is not making. I don't hear him saying that he's going to divest all of the oil that he invested with his Brookdale investments. I don't see him doing anything of the sort. In fact, he hasn't even disclosed his contradictions, and he's still running for leadership of the Liberal Party. He wants to be prime minister without ever having disclosed his conflicts of interest with his money. Let's not forget that. The Liberal Party, with their 11 people working for, the list of reasons why the Liberal Party needs to be, torn down to its very foundation and rebuilt is longer than a page of paper. However, his idea is that he's going to tell everybody, don't worry about it, the Americans will change in a couple of years, is wrong. And why he thinks that Canadians don't want to have that is also wrong. That's because of his own vision for whatever. Who can fathom such an individual, honestly, who is so willing to just completely disregard all of the facts going on around them. Every bank that he thought he had in Canada. So now he wants all of these banks to disclose to him how they're making their investments, right? I mean, the ideas that have come out of him they almost leave scary behind and become a joke. If he wasn't trying to be the prime minister of the country, it would be funny, but it's not funny. And as we are already under the thumb of all of these environmental policies that undoubtedly came directly from him, even if they passed through over the dinner plate into Freeland's ear or Trudeau's ear or Guilbeault or any of them. I mean, they have already done enough damage to this country, and he wants to turn it up. He wants to take away everything and give you nothing and try to convince you that you will be happy. Well, I've said it once and I'll say it again. When a person is running away from a country that they were born in to come to Canada, the one thing they're not saying to themselves is, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, I can't wait to get to Canada so I can have nothing. Why would he think in his mind that people don't want what he has? And if owning nothing and making you happy is going to make you so happy, why does he not do like a monk and just give it all away? He should be ecstatic at that point. We have to be very careful. I mean, I'm not going to vote in the Liberal leadership race, but if you're out there they're saying 300,000 new people have signed up to be a Liberal, you should not cast your vote for Mark Carney. He is completely dangerous for the future, no matter what generation you talk about and no matter what political stripe you work under. That's just my opinion. You can leave me your opinion down in the comments. I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.